In the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania, where family farms dot the landscape like patches on a well-worn quilt and community bonds run deeper than the roots of century-old oak trees, unfolds a story that will challenge every assumption you have about beauty, worth, and the transformative power of unconditional love. This is the remarkable tale of Silas Brennan, a widowed farmer who discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures come in packages the world has rejected, and that true beauty shines brightest when it's nurtured by kindness and compassion. If you're ready for a story that will move you to tears and remind you that real worth isn't measured by appearances but by the size of one's heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of human kindness. Don't forget to let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our amazing global community of believers in the power of love to transform lives. The autumn rain was falling steadily on the weathered porch of the Brennan farmhouse when Silas first heard the sound of wagon wheels struggling through the muddy lane that led to his property. It was October 1923, and the 42-year-old farmer had been living alone for 3 years, ever since influenza had claimed his wife Martha and their only son, leaving him to work his 200-acre dairy farm in the hills outside Lancaster, with only his cattle and his grief for company. Silas set down the harness he'd been mending and stepped to the window, squinting through the rain at the approaching wagon. It was a battered affair, pulled by a single horse that looked as worn down as the vehicle itself. A woman sat hunched on the driver's seat, her shawl pulled tight against the weather, and beside her sat what appeared to be a small figure bundled in rough blankets. When the wagon finally creaked to a stop in front of the farmhouse, Silas opened the door and stepped onto the covered porch, noting immediately that the woman looked haggard and desperate, her clothes worn and her face marked by the kind of hardship that aged people before their time. "You, Silas Brennan?" the woman called out, not bothering to climb down from the wagon seat. "I am." "What can I do for you, ma'am?" "Name's Clara Hodge. I heard in town that you might be looking for help around your farm, someone to do cooking and cleaning and such." Silas studied the woman more carefully. She appeared to be in her 30s, though hard living made it difficult to tell, and there was something in her manner that suggested desperation barely held in check. "Mrs. Hodge, I appreciate the offer, but I manage fine on my own. Don't really have need for—" "I'm not talking about me," Clara interrupted, her voice taking on a hard edge. "I'm talking about her." She gestured toward the small, bundled figure beside her. "My daughter. She's 12 years old, strong as an ox, and willing to work for just room and board." For the first time, Silas looked closely at the child, sitting beside Clara Hodge. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat, though not for the reasons Clara apparently expected. The girl was indeed 12, with a face that bore the unmistakable signs of what doctors called a cleft palate and lip, a birth defect that left her upper lip split and her speech impaired. But what struck Silas most powerfully wasn't the deformity that had obviously caused her mother to view her as a burden. It was her eyes, large, intelligent, and filled with a sadness that no 12-year-old should have to carry. "Ma'am," Silas said carefully, "are you saying you want to leave your daughter here to work for me?" Clara's expression hardened further. "Look at her, Mr. Brennan. She's marked, cursed, whatever you want to call it. She scares customers away from my boarding house, and frankly, she's more trouble than she's worth. But she can work, and she doesn't eat much. I figured a bachelor farmer might have use for help that doesn't cost wages." Silas felt a cold anger building in his chest. He'd heard of parents abandoning children during hard times, but the casual cruelty in Clara Hodge's voice as she described her own daughter was something that challenged his understanding of human nature. "What's your name, child?" he asked, addressing the girl directly for the first time. The girl looked at her mother as if seeking permission to speak, then back at Silas. When she answered, her words were slightly slurred due to her cleft palate, but her voice was clear and intelligent. "Patience, sir. Patience Hodge." "Well, Patience," Silas said, ignoring Clara entirely. "Would you like to come inside out of this rain?" I've got hot coffee and some biscuits left from breakfast. Clara started to protest. Now see here, Mr. Brennan, I don't have time for social calls. Either you want the girl or you don't. I've got business back in town. Silas looked at Clara Hodge with the kind of steady gaze that had served him well in his 42 years of dealing with difficult people and challenging situations. Mrs. Hodge, I'd like to speak with Patience privately before I make any decisions. If you're in such a hurry to get back to town, perhaps you could leave her here for the afternoon while we discuss the arrangement. Fine by me, Clara said, already gathering the reins. Her bag's in the back of the wagon. She's got 2 dresses and some underclothings. That's all she needs. As Clara prepared to drive away, Patience called out to her with a desperation that broke Silas's heart. Mama, when will you come back for me? Clara didn't even turn around. Be good, Patience. Do what Mr. Brennan tells you, and maybe things will work out. As the wagon disappeared down the muddy lane, Silas found himself alone with a 12-year-old girl who had just been abandoned by her own mother with the casual indifference most people reserved for unwanted livestock. Well, Patience, he said gently, let's get you out of this rain. We've got some talking to do. Inside the farmhouse, Silas busied himself preparing coffee and warming up biscuits while Patience sat at the kitchen table, her small bag clutched in her lap and her eyes wide with uncertainty. The kitchen was clean, but obviously the domain of a bachelor, functional rather than welcoming, efficient rather than warm. Patience, Silas said as he set a plate of biscuits and a cup of warm milk in front of her. I want you to understand something right from the start. What your mother just did, leaving you here like that, it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because there's something wrong with her. Patience looked up at him with surprise, as if no adult had ever spoken to her with such directness and respect. But I am marked, sir. Mama says I'm cursed, and that's why Papa left us when I was little. Silas sat down across from her at the table, noting how she unconsciously tried to hide the left side of her face with her hand when she spoke. Patience, you're not cursed. You were born with a condition that affects how you look and how you speak, but that doesn't make you any less valuable as a person. But people stare at me, and children laugh. Some people do stare, and some children are cruel because they don't understand, but that says something about them, not about you. For the next hour, Silas drew Patience out in conversation, learning about her life with her mother, her rudimentary education, and her dreams for the future. What emerged was a picture of a remarkably intelligent and resilient child who had been made to feel ashamed of her very existence by a mother who viewed her disability as a personal embarrassment. Patience, Silas said finally, I want to make you an offer, but I want you to understand that it's not the same offer your mother thought she was making. What do you mean, sir? Your mother thought she was giving you away to work as my servant, but what I'm offering is to become part of my family, to be my daughter if you'll have me as a father. Patience stared at him with disbelief. But sir, I'm not pretty like other girls. I can't speak properly. Why would you want me as a daughter? Silas reached across the table and gently took her hand. Patience. I lost my wife and son 3 years ago, and this house has been empty of laughter and love ever since. You seem like a bright, kind, hard-working girl who deserves a chance to grow up in a home where she's wanted and valued. Would you like that? The tears that had been threatening to fall since her mother drove away finally came. Not tears of sadness, but of hope and relief. Yes, sir. I would like that very much. Then that's settled. Tomorrow we'll go into town and see about making the legal arrangements. Tonight we'll get you settled in the room that used to belong to my son. It's been empty too long. As Silas showed Patience to her new room, a comfortable space with a quilt-covered bed, a small desk, and windows that looked out over the rolling farmland, he found himself thinking about the strange turn his day had taken. He'd awakened that morning as a lonely widower with nothing but his cattle for company. He was ending it as the adoptive father of a 12-year-old girl who had been abandoned by her own mother, but who possessed a spirit that had somehow survived years of rejection and cruelty. Mr. Brennan, Patience said, as she set her small bag on the bed, Are you sure you want me to stay? I don't want to be a burden. Silas looked at this remarkable child who had already begun to fill the empty spaces in his heart and his home. Patience. You're not a burden. You're a blessing. And I have a feeling you're going to teach me as much as I hope to teach you. That night, as Silas lay in his bed listening to the sounds of another person moving around his house, the soft footsteps in the hallway, the gentle closing of doors, the whispered prayers that carried through the thin walls, he understood that God had answered a prayer he hadn't even known he was making. He'd asked for relief from his loneliness. Instead, he'd been given the chance to save a child who needed saving, and in the process, to save himself. The healing begins. 6 months after Patience's arrival at the Brennan farm, the transformation was remarkable, not just in the child who had blossomed under Silas's patient care, but in the man who had rediscovered his purpose through the simple act of loving an unwanted daughter. The farmhouse that had echoed with emptiness now rang with laughter, conversation, and the daily rhythms of a family learning to trust and care for each other. Dr. Edmund Walsh, the physician who served the scattered farming communities around Lancaster, had become a regular visitor to the Brennan farm during those first months, not just for medical consultations, but as a friend who had witnessed one of the most remarkable transformations he'd seen in 30 years of rural practice. Silas, Doctor. Walsh said, as he completed his monthly examination of Patience, I want you to know that this child's progress has been extraordinary, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. Patience sat on the examination table in the farmhouse kitchen, no longer automatically covering her face when strangers looked at her. Under Silas's patient encouragement and Dr. Walsh's medical care, she had learned to speak more clearly despite her cleft palate, and more importantly, she had begun to believe that she deserved to be heard. Dr. Walsh has been telling me about some new surgical procedures they're developing for cleft palates, Silas said to Patience, operations that might be able to help you speak even more clearly and reduce some of the scarring. Patience looked thoughtful. Would it be expensive? That's not for you to worry about, Silas replied firmly. The question is whether you'd want to have the surgery. I don't know, Patience admitted. I've gotten used to looking the way I look, and you've taught me that my worth isn't based on my appearance. Dr. Walsh smiled at the maturity in her response. Patience, that's exactly the right attitude. Any decision about surgery should be based on what would make you more comfortable and confident, not on what other people might think. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Reverend Thomas Murphy, pastor of the Lutheran church that Silas had begun attending regularly since Patience's arrival. The elderly minister had become another key figure in Patience's transformation, helping her develop not just academic skills, but a strong sense of self-worth, grounded in faith and community belonging. Good afternoon, everyone, Reverend Murphy said as he entered the kitchen. Patience, I wanted to tell you that Mrs. Henderson has been raving about the help you've been giving her with her grandchildren. She says you have a natural gift for teaching. Patience blushed with pleasure. As part of her integration into the community, Silas had encouraged her to volunteer at the church, helping with Sunday school classes and community events. Her patience with children and her natural intelligence had made her a valuable asset to the congregation. I enjoy working with the younger children, Patience said. They don't seem to notice my face the way adults do. They just care about whether I'm kind to them and whether I can help them learn their letters. That's because children often see more clearly than adults, Reverend Murphy observed. They look at the heart rather than the surface. Over the past 6 months, Patience had also proven herself invaluable to the daily operations of the farm. Her quick mind and willing hands had made her an excellent partner for Silas, in everything from milking cows to maintaining the extensive vegetable garden that now provided much of their food. Dr. Walsh, Silas said, I want to ask your opinion about something. I've been thinking about arranging for Patience to receive more formal education. The one-room schoolhouse here is fine for basic skills, but she's clearly capable of much more advanced learning. I've been thinking the same thing, the doctor replied. There's a teacher in Lancaster, Miss Elizabeth Crane, who has experience working with children who have special needs. She might be willing to come out here once a week to supplement Patience's regular schooling. Patience looked up with excitement. You mean I could learn more advanced mathematics and literature? If that's what you want, Silas said. I want you to have every opportunity to develop your talents and abilities. As Dr. Walsh and Reverend Murphy prepared to leave, both men reflected on the remarkable changes they had witnessed in the Brennan household. Silas, who had been withdrawn and despondent after losing his wife and son, had regained his enthusiasm for life through the simple act of caring for Patience. And Patience, who had arrived as a frightened, self-conscious child, convinced of her own worthlessness, was blossoming into a confident young woman with clear intelligence and strong character. Silas, Doctor, Walsh said privately as they walked toward his buggy, I want you to know that what you've done for that child is nothing short of miraculous. But I also want you to be prepared for challenges ahead. What kind of challenges? Patience is growing up. She's going to be a young woman soon, and she's going to face questions about her future, about marriage and family. Her cleft palate may limit some of her options in ways that could be difficult for both of you. Silas considered the doctor's words carefully. Dr. Walsh, I've learned that Patience is capable of far more than anyone imagined when they first looked at her. I suspect she'll continue to surprise us with her strength and resilience. That evening, as Silas and Patience worked together in the barn, completing the daily milking routine that had become one of their favorite times for conversation, she brought up the subject that had been weighing on her mind. Papa Silas, she said, using the name she had begun calling him after the adoption papers were finalized, do you think I'll ever get married and have children? Silas paused in his milking, recognizing the importance of his response. At 13, Patience was beginning to think about her future as a woman, and her question reflected both normal adolescent curiosity and deeper concerns about how her appearance might affect her prospects. Patience, I think any man who gets to know you, really know you, would consider himself lucky to marry you. You're intelligent, kind, hardworking, and beautiful in all the ways that matter most. But what about my face? What about the way I speak? Patience, do you remember what you told me about the children at Sunday school? About how they don't seem to notice your appearance because they're focused on your kindness? Yes, the right man will be like those children. He'll see your heart first and everything else will be secondary. Patience was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Do you think I should have the surgery Dr. Walsh mentioned? I think, Silas said carefully, that any decision about surgery should be made for the right reasons. If you want the surgery because it would make you more comfortable or confident, then we should seriously consider it. But if you want it because you think it would make you more acceptable to other people, then maybe we should wait and think about it more. I want to think about it, Patience said. I want to understand all my options before I decide. Indeed, as they finished the evening chores and walked back toward the farmhouse, Silas reflected on how much his perspective on life had changed since Patience's arrival. Before she came, he had been focused on simply surviving each day, maintaining his farm and his routines while trying to manage his grief. Now he found himself thinking constantly about the future, about Patience's education, her opportunities, her happiness, and the kind of woman she would become. Papa Silas, Patience said as they climbed the porch steps, I want you to know that I'm grateful every day that Mama brought me here. Even though she didn't want me anymore, it led me to you. Mom, Silas put his arm around his adopted daughter's shoulders, marveling at the resilience and wisdom she had developed despite her difficult early years. Patience, your mother's inability to see your value was her loss and my gain. I can't imagine my life without you now. That night, as Silas sat in his study working on the farm's accounts while Patience read in the sitting room, he found himself thinking about Clara Hodge and wondering if she ever regretted her decision to abandon her daughter. He hoped she did, not out of vindictiveness, but because it would mean she had eventually recognized what she had thrown away. But mostly, he felt grateful. Grateful that circumstances had brought Patience to his door, grateful for the privilege of watching her grow and flourish, and grateful for the reminder that sometimes the most precious gifts come in packages that others have discarded. The unwanted child had become the center of his world, and in saving her she had saved him right back. The test of character. 2 years later, in the spring of 1926, Patience Brennan stood before the mirror in her bedroom, preparing for what would be one of the most challenging days of her young life. At 15, she had grown into a poised and intelligent young woman whose cleft palate, while still visible, no longer defined how people saw her once they got to know her. The surgery Dr. Walsh had recommended had been successful, improving both her speech and her appearance. But more importantly, 4 years of Silas's unconditional love and the community's gradual acceptance had given her a confidence that transcended physical imperfection. Today was the day of the Lancaster County Academic Competition, where students from across the region would compete in mathematics, literature, science, and public speaking. Patience had qualified in 3 categories, an achievement that had surprised even Miss Elizabeth Crane, the advanced tutor who had been working with her for 2 years. "Patience," Silas called from downstairs. "Are you ready? We don't want to be late." "Coming, Papa," she replied, taking one last look at herself in the mirror. She wore her best dress, a blue cotton frock that Silas had insisted on buying for the occasion, and her long brown hair was neatly braided and pinned. The left side of her face still showed the signs of her birth defect, but it no longer made her want to hide. As they drove toward Lancaster in the farm wagon, Silas could sense Patience's nervousness despite her outward calm. "How are you feeling about today?" "Excited and terrified in equal measure," she admitted. "I've never competed against students from the town schools before. What if I embarrass myself?" "Patience, you've been working with material that's more advanced than what most students your age encounter. Miss Crane says you're reading at a college level and your mathematics skills are exceptional. You have nothing to prove to anyone but yourself." The competition was being held at Franklin and Marshall College, and when they arrived, Patience was struck by the impressive brick buildings and the air of academic seriousness that pervaded the campus. Students from a dozen different schools were gathered on the main lawn, and Patience noticed immediately how many of them looked at her with curiosity when they saw her face. "Remember," Silas said as they approached the registration table, "you belong here. You've earned the right to compete, and you have as much chance of success as anyone else." The first competition was mathematics, and Patience found herself in a classroom with 20 other students, all working through increasingly complex problems under the supervision of college professors. Despite her initial nervousness, she found herself relaxing as she lost herself in the familiar comfort of numbers and equations. When the results were announced an hour later, Patience had placed second overall, losing the top spot by only 2 points to a boy from Lancaster Academy who had been studying advanced mathematics for 3 years longer than she had. "Miss Brennan," said Professor William Hayes, who had supervised the mathematics competition, "I'm very impressed with your performance. Have you given any thought to pursuing higher education?" Patience felt a thrill of pride mixed with uncertainty. "I'd like to, sir, but I'm not sure about the practical aspects. I live on a farm, and I help my father with the daily operations." "Well, you clearly have the aptitude for advanced study. I hope you'll consider your options carefully." The literature competition was held in the afternoon, and Patience found herself analyzing poetry and prose with the same confidence she had brought to the mathematics problems. Her years of reading with Silas and Miss Crane had given her a deep appreciation for language and literature that served her well in the challenging examination. But it was the public speaking competition that would prove to be her greatest test. Standing before an audience of students, teachers, and parents, Patience was acutely aware that many people were hearing her speak for the first time and were undoubtedly focused on the slight impediment that remained from her cleft palate. Her assigned topic was the value of individual differences in society, and as she began to speak, Patience realized that her own experiences had given her unique insights into the subject. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and strong despite her nervousness, "I stand before you today as living proof that individual differences are not obstacles to overcome, but gifts to be celebrated. I was born with a cleft palate, a condition that affected my appearance and my speech. For the first 12 years of my life, I was taught to believe that this difference made me less valuable, less worthy of love and respect." The room had grown completely quiet, and Patience could see that she had captured the audience's attention, not through pity, but through the power of her message. "But I was fortunate enough to be adopted by a man who taught me that my worth is not determined by my appearance or by how others perceive my differences. He taught me that every person has unique talents and perspectives that can contribute to the betterment of society, regardless of what they look like or how they sound." And as Patience continued her speech, weaving together personal experience with broader philosophical insights about tolerance, acceptance, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, she could see the impact of her words on the faces in the audience. We live in a society that often judges people by superficial characteristics, by their appearance, their accent, their social status, or their physical abilities. But when we do this, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to learn from people who might have profound insights to offer simply because they don't fit our narrow definitions of normal or acceptable. When Patience concluded her speech with a call for greater understanding and acceptance of individual differences, the applause was immediate and sustained. But more than the applause, it was the look of pride and admiration on Silas's face that told her she had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. Later, when the final results were announced, Patience had placed first in literature, second in mathematics, and first in public speaking. But more importantly, she had proven to herself and to everyone present that her differences were not limitations, but strengths that had given her unique perspectives and insights. "Miss Brennan," said the competition director as he presented her with her awards, "your speech today was one of the most moving and thought-provoking presentations we've ever heard in this competition. You have a rare gift for connecting with people and making them think about important issues." As they drove home in the gathering dusk, Patience clutched her awards and reflected on the day's events. "Papa, do you think I could really go to college?" Silas smiled at his adopted daughter, remembering the frightened, rejected child who had arrived at his farm 4 years earlier. "Patience, I think you can do anything you set your mind to. The question is what you want to do." "I want to become a teacher," she said without hesitation. "I want to work with children who feel different or rejected the way I did. I want to help them understand that their differences can be strengths." "Then that's what we'll work toward," Silas promised. "We'll find a way to make it happen." Aye. That evening, as news of Patience's success spread through their community, neighbors began stopping by the farm to offer congratulations. What struck Silas most was how genuinely proud these people were of Patience's achievements, and how completely they had accepted her as one of their own. "You know," said Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had first given Patience a chance to help with her grandchildren, "when you first brought that girl home, some folks weren't sure what to think, but she's proven that character matters more than appearance, and she's made all of us better people by her example." As Silas tucked Patience into bed that night, she looked up at him with the same trusting eyes that had captured his heart 4 years earlier. "Papa, do you ever regret taking me in? Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if Mama hadn't brought me here?" Silas sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand. "Patience, you saved my life as much as I saved yours. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions of living without any real purpose or joy. You gave me a reason to hope again, a reason to plan for the future. a reason to believe that good things could still happen. I love you, Papa. I love you too, daughter. And I'm proud of you every single day. As Silas turned out the lamp and left Patience to sleep, he reflected on the remarkable journey they had traveled together. The unwanted child who had been given away because she was too ugly had become a confident young woman whose inner beauty and strength of character had touched everyone who knew her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight Silas Brennan fell asleep knowing that love truly could transform lives in ways that seemed miraculous to those who witnessed them. The fullness of love. 7 years later, in the summer of 1933, the Brennan farm was bustling with activity as preparations were made for what would be one of the most joyful celebrations the Lancaster County community had seen in years. Patience Brennan, now 22 and having just graduated from Franklin and Marshall College with highest honors, was about to marry David Thornfield, a young doctor who had fallen in love with her during her volunteer work at the county hospital. Silas stood on the front porch of the farmhouse, watching as neighbors and friends decorated tables and hung bunting for the wedding reception that would take place in the meadow behind the house. At 52, he had aged gracefully, his hair now silver, but his step still strong, his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from years of smiling and laughing with the daughter who had transformed his life. "Mr. Brennan," called Mrs. Henderson, now in her 70s but still spry enough to direct the decoration committee, "where do you want us to put the wedding cake table?" "Wherever you think best, Mrs. Henderson. You ladies have much better judgment about these things than I do." Dr. Edmund Walsh, now retired but still a close family friend, joined Silas on the porch. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years since a frightened little girl arrived at your door in the back of her mother's wagon. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like a lifetime ago," Silas reflected. "But I can honestly say they've been the best 10 years of my life." The transformation that had occurred over those 10 years was nothing short of remarkable. Patience had not only excelled academically, earning her teaching degree and certification, but she had also become a beloved figure in the community, known for her work with children who had special needs and her advocacy for people with disabilities. Her relationship with David Thornfield had begun 2 years earlier when she had been volunteering at the county hospital, reading to patients and helping with children who were receiving medical treatment. David, a recent graduate of Jefferson Medical College, had been immediately struck not by Patience's appearance, but by her compassion, intelligence, and the way she could connect with patients who were struggling with their own physical challenges. "Dr. Walsh," Silas said, "I want to thank you again for all you've done for Patience over the years. The surgeries, the encouragement, the introductions to other medical professionals who could help her. You've been like a second father to her. Silas, it's been my privilege. I've learned as much from watching Patience grow and flourish as she's learned from any medical treatment I've provided. She's taught all of us that healing involves much more than surgical procedures or medications." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a buggy carrying Reverend Murphy, now approaching 80, but still insisting on performing the wedding ceremony, and Miss Elizabeth Crane, Patience's former tutor, who had become a close family friend and mentor. "Silas," Reverend Murphy called out as he climbed down from the buggy, "I just wanted you to know that this is one of the most joyful ceremonies I've ever been asked to perform. To see how far Patience has come and to witness the love between her and David, it's a testament to the power of faith and family." Miss Crane, a woman in her 50s who had devoted her career to educating exceptional children, approached Silas with tears in her eyes. "I've taught hundreds of students over the years, but I've never seen a transformation as remarkable as Patience's. She's become everything I always believed she could be, and more." As the afternoon progressed and more guests arrived for the evening ceremony, Silas found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. There had been challenges along the way, moments when Patience had struggled with self-doubt, times when ignorant people had made cruel comments, periods when the medical expenses had strained the farm's finances. But every obstacle had been overcome through determination, community support, and the unshakable bond between father and daughter. The most emotional moment came when Clara Hodge, Patience's birth mother, arrived unexpectedly just as the ceremony was about to begin. Silas hadn't seen or heard from her in 10 years, and her presence created a stir among the guests who knew the story of Patience's abandonment. Clara, now in her 40s and showing the effects of a hard life, approached Silas with obvious nervousness. "Mr. Brennan, I know I have no right to be here, but I heard about the wedding and I wanted to see how she turned out." Silas studied the woman who had given away her daughter because she was too ugly, trying to find compassion for someone who had caused so much pain. "Mrs. Hodge, this is Patience's day. If she wants to speak with you, that's her decision to make." When Patience emerged from the farmhouse in her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown that Silas had insisted on having made by the finest seamstress in Lancaster, she was radiant with happiness. The scars from her cleft palate were still visible, but they were overshadowed by the confidence and joy that seemed to emanate from her very being. "Mama?" Patience said when she saw Clara, her voice filled with surprise rather than anger. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you married," Clara replied, her voice breaking, "and to tell you that I was wrong about everything. You're beautiful, Patience. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." And Patience looked at the mother who had abandoned her, and Silas held his breath, wondering how she would respond to this unexpected encounter. But Patience's reaction was characteristic of the woman she had become. "Thank you for coming, Mama. I'm glad you could be here to see that everything worked out the way it was supposed to." As the wedding ceremony began in the meadow behind the farmhouse, with nearly 200 guests gathered to celebrate Patience and David's union, Silas reflected on the remarkable circle of healing that had been completed. The unwanted child had become a beloved daughter. The rejected girl had become a respected teacher, and the woman who had been deemed too ugly for love had found a man who cherished her exactly as she was. Dr. David Thornfield, standing at the altar waiting for his bride, was a man who had chosen Patience, not despite her differences, but because of the strength and compassion those differences had helped her develop. Their courtship had been based on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep appreciation for each other's character rather than superficial attraction. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Murphy began, his voice carrying clearly across the meadow, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other the completion of God's plan for their lives." As Silas walked Patience down the aisle, he was struck by the symbolism of the moment. He was giving away the daughter who had saved his life as much as he had saved hers. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Reverend Murphy asked. "I do," Silas replied, his voice strong with pride and love. As David and Patience exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all of life's challenges, Silas understood that the circle was complete. The unwanted child had become a cherished daughter, the rejected girl had become a respected woman, and the person deemed too ugly for love had found her perfect match. Later, as the reception continued into the evening with music, dancing, and celebration, Silas found himself sitting with Dr. Walsh, watching Patience and David surrounded by friends and family who loved them unconditionally. "You know, Silas," Dr. Walsh said, "when I first examined Patience 10 years ago, I saw a malnourished, frightened child with a cleft palate. Tonight, I see a confident, educated, beloved woman who has overcome every obstacle life placed in her path." "She's remarkable," Silas agreed. "But what's most remarkable is that she's taught all of us that real beauty comes from the heart, and that love truly can transform lives." The story of Silas Brennan and Patience proves that sometimes the greatest treasures come in packages the world has rejected. What began with a mother's cruel abandonment became a testament to the transformative power of unconditional love. showing that true beauty isn't measured by appearance, but by the size of one's heart and the strength of one's character. Today, the Brennan Farm stands as a reminder that families aren't just made by blood, but by choice, love, and commitment. Patience went on to become one of Lancaster County's most beloved teachers, specializing in helping children with special needs discover their own worth and potential. David's medical practice flourished as he became known for his compassionate care of patients who faced physical challenges. But perhaps the most important lesson from their story is this: when we look beyond surface appearances and choose to see the potential in others, we don't just change their lives, we transform our own. Silas thought he was simply providing a home for an unwanted child. Instead, he discovered that the greatest act of love is recognizing value where others see only flaws. If this incredible story of unconditional love and second chances touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that true beauty shines from within. Subscribe for more amazing tales that prove love conquers prejudice and that every person has immeasurable worth. Don't forget to let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love hearing from our global family who believes in the power of love to transform lives. Have you ever been judged by your appearance or seen someone else treated unfairly because of how they looked? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.